We are going to remove our weaving from the loom using overhand knots. So we're going to knot the warp ends together in pairs, and it's going to create a little row of decorative knots that sits on the weaving. Our second step is what we do with our weft tails. So we'll come to that shortly in a second video. We're going to thread those up onto a wool needle and they're going to get woven into the back of our passementerie. But first of all, we're going to take this off the loom. So the view here is of the top of my loom. So we've got the warp, obviously the notches. Now, at the top of the frame loom, you're just going to slide out like the first little group of warp ends. So they come out as a little group of 4. And you're going to cut through the loop at the top. So now you can see that they're in their little consecutive pairs. So we'll move that one to the side. They get a little bit sticky because they're wool. So we're going to take the first consecutive pair. And I'm just going to hold it at the end. And then I'm going to pinch halfway down. Then with my left hand, I'm just going to bring that pinched point down. So I'm kind of creating an L shape. Now all I'm going to do with my left hand, I'm just going to move it a little bit so you can see, so there's the pinched bit. I'm actually going to twist this loop. So I'm just twisting it back on itself. Then this tail, I'm just going to feed through the loop. Like so. Now this bit can be a little bit tricky. What we've got to do is tighten the knot whilst we slide it down so the knot eventually sits on top of the weaving. So I'm going to pull on this tail whilst I'm also guiding this loop down. And then tighten. And you want the knot to sit right on top of the weaving without actually disturbing the weaving. So you don't want to compress the weaving down. So I'll give you a close-up view. You can see right there. And then we carry on in exactly the same way. So we then take the next consecutive pair. You're going to pinch halfway down, make that L shape. So it's right there. You're going to flip that loop, take the tail through, and then pull on the tail whilst you're guiding that loop down. And then you can just give it a little tug on top of the weaving. And you're going to do exactly the same process with your other 2 warp ends. Here I've knotted all my warp ends, so you can see that lovely little row of knots. Now you can see I've got quite a lot of warp left, and you can cut this shorter. I wouldn't go any shorter than about that. So that's probably not even 1/4 of an inch. Because if you cut them way too short, the tails, so way too close to the knot, what happens is sometimes the knot comes undone. Now we're going to rotate our frame loom. So I'm spinning it around so the bottom now becomes the top. And we're going to repeat the same knotting process, except there's one main difference. So you can see here in green, that's my ground end that we wove through right at the beginning. That's not actually part of our design, so we don't really want it there. So what we're going to do is we're going to knot in the same way, but we're going to guide out, or we're going to pull out the warp threads from the ground end. So first of all, what we'll do is this time, because of how we've knotted at the top of the frame loom, we can't easily pull the first section out. So you're going to go in with scissors and you're going to cut through the first group of yarn at the top of the frame loom. Now mind your fingers because it can be a little bit tricky because it's a bit tight. Okay. And then you're just going to pull out that first group. You'll see you've got all these gnarly knots. Sometimes you can just guide them straight off. like so. So I've just cut the first pair. All I'm going to do is I'm then just taking out that first pair from underneath the ground end. You just do 2 at a time, then knot it, then do the next 2, and so on, like that. It's the same knotting process. It's a little bit tricky because the warp ends are so much shorter, but as long as we can just make that little loop and pull through, there we go. Tighten like that. I'll give it a little more of a tighten. So just like that. So I'm going to go ahead and do the others. So pull out that next little group. So that one comes out as a group. Cut. Take that next pair and just guide them out like so. Okay, and we knot in the same way. And then we're going to carry on with our last remaining warp ends. Now this is knotted, so both ends are knotted and it's free from the loom. I'm just going to go ahead and trim off my warp tails a little bit so it matches the other end. Can look very nice to leave the warp ends too, just gives you a different look. So there we have it. So we're free from the loom. Now our next job is to deal with these weft tails and also our decorative weft tails. So I'll show you that in the next video. Weaving in your weft tails is very simple and quick to do. You will need a wool needle. So it's a large eye blunt end wool needle. And what we're going to do is we're going to take our weft tails and we're going to weave them into the back of our passementerie. So this is the front, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over. Now, if you're uncertain about which is the back and the front, you can have a look at the back and you can see that the back of mine is a little bit rougher. And you can see I've got these bumps here. So that always happens on the back. So then what we're going to do is I'm going to start off with my first tail down here. Now, if you've used double knit wool, you should be able to thread it through the large eye of a wool needle, both of them together. But I'm going to show you a little trick that I learned from an embroiderer friend about how to thread the needle. So rather than kind of stuffing it through, what you do is you turn your needle on the side, put your yarn on the top, pull along the needle, twist the needle, and then you can thread the yarn through. I'm sure lots of you know how to do that already. Okay, so pull it through. Now all we're going to do is we're going to catch this wool through some of these little bumps on the back of the weaving. Well, they look a bit like stitches. Now we are not pushing the needle through to the front. We're simply going to slip the needle through some of these bumps. Now I always avoid catching underneath the edge warp threads. That's because it's very easy to pull them too much and then you yank on that and then you get a sort of wibbly edge which is hard to correct. So I'm going to come in to this one and I'm just going to slip the needle through like that. So I'm going bottom to top. You can just kind of wiggle it through a bit. Ooh, pull through the tail. Okay, like that. Now I'm going to come over, I'm going to work towards the left. I'm just going to come over to another bump. Doesn't matter which one. And I'm going to go top to bottom. Like that. Just give it a little tug. And then we're going to do one more. So I'm going to come over and I'm going to go bottom to top. Now 3 passes is plenty. Because we're not going to be using these textiles, they're not going to be abraded, 3 is enough. then all you do is you just trim back that tail, like so. So I'll show you, so it's right there. But if we look on the front, we can't see. So completely invisible. So work your way up your passementerie, weaving in your weft tails. So if you've got two weft tails, like very, very close together, like I have here, what you want to do is when you weave them in, I'm going to take this weft tail and weave it in down, and I'm going to take this weft tail and I'm going to weave it up. And I'll do the same with this one. You just don't want to put them in the same place, because if I try to weave them in the same place, it's going to be very thick and bulky. So by separating them, it gives you a nice clean finish. Now all my ends are woven in, and you can see it's nice and neat. But what we need to think about next is what we want to do with our decorative weft ends. So you can see with this one, I've just knotted mine, and it's a material that frays quite easily, so I can kind of just untwist it a little bit so I get like a little tassel-y thing happening. Now, what you can do as well, if you don't want that kind of tassel-y edge, if you get fabric glue or Copydex glue, you can just use a paintbrush and paint a line around the diameter of the cord where you want to cut it, let it dry, cut through it, then just put a bit more glue on your finger and just dab on the cord end to seal it. Another option is what you can do is where you've got sort of a longer length, if you want it to be nice and flush on the surface, fold it nicely. You can take it onto the back. So you can kind of finesse that as much as you like. Then what we do on the back is you just take a regular sharps needle and a bit of cotton or, polyester sewing thread and just stitch it down to the back. Stitch it down quite well, just catching on the back, and then just cut off the excess. That can be quite a nice option. It works better with some materials than others. You can see this is like a sort of climbing cord, so it's quite rigid. So something a bit softer, you get a really neat edge. So I'm just going to knot this one because I quite like a decorative knot. So you just knot it. You want to make sure it's quite tight. And then trim off the excess. I'm going to fluff up my edges a bit so that it matches. And there you have it, one finished passementerie. Now, if you want to, you can give it a little steam with the iron, which just relaxes it, because when the weaving comes off the loom, it's called loom state, so it's a little bit stiff. So it's up to you. You can get the iron nice and hot on a steam setting and just hover the iron over it. Don't press the iron down onto it. And you'll see that just kind of relaxes it a bit. But there we have it, complete.